Hello and welcome to this beta test of Harlan on the Hill. We've got a jam-packed show. We've got a special guest, Ryan Mara, who will be joining us in just a couple of minutes, and there's a lot happening on the international stage. I mean, the world feels at this point to be somewhat of a hotbed between everything that's happening in our war against ISIS, the Syrian regime, and keeping North Korea at bay. The world is maybe the most unstable it's been in quite some time. We're going to start, I believe, with Ryan, and we're going to talk about ISIS, and then we'll get to North Korea later in the show. Ryan, are you with us? Hey, Ryan, can you hear us?
I can.
Oh, here we go. So, Ryan, first of all, for those of us, or those of our viewers that are meeting you for the first time, can you give us kind of a background on what you're doing? I know you're a professor and you're an expert in foreign policy and counterterrorism, but can you give us a little bit of your bio?
Sure. My official title is Shillman Fellow and also National Security Analyst with the Clarion Project, which is a nonprofit educational organization focused on Islamic extremism. And we also do a lot of positive work with Muslim reformers as well. I'm also an adjunct professor of counterterrorism for Regent and Liberty universities, and I've been doing things like that since I was a teenager, actually.
Wow.
So I've been doing this for some time now.
Yeah. Well, and you were, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were a Trump supporter during the election. Was that right?
I don't say my
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you have a lot of
things that I bashed and things that I supported.
You have a lot of common sense, so I'm giving you. Forgive me for lumping you in with us Trump supporters. So I guess the first thing I wanted to talk about is during the election, President Donald Trump he promised to take on ISIS pretty aggressively from the beginning, and we haven't seen a lot of action on that front yet. We saw him very active and proactive in the case of Syria and playing offense to some degree with North Korea. But in terms of taking on ISIS, what are we doing differently that we weren't doing under the Obama administration?
Well, I would assume if it's a lot of covert stuff, you're just not going to know about it. If you look at what's going on with North Korea, and particularly the raids in Afghanistan that targeted the ISIS leader there, you do get the indications that more options are on the table, that the handcuffs are coming off. But ISIS was downsliding under the Obama administration. That is true. And the Trump administration is still young. And when it comes to war, it takes a while for first of all, to get new personnel in there, then to start making decisions, and then much longer for you to see the results of those decisions. But
oh, we're losing you, Ryan.
Hey,
Ryan, you're cutting out on us. Let's go back to one. We're going to resolve this with Ryan. Hopefully Hey, Ryan. Can you hear me?
Hey, can you hear me?
Hey, yeah, we're back with you. So let's go to the wide.
Okay.
So you were saying
So I was saying, but if you wanted to look at some concrete decisions that were made under the Trump administration that you can't say is just carryover from the Obama administration, you would look at the raids that are happening in Somalia against Al-Qaeda. That is a new thing that shows that the handcuffs are coming off. And then Afghanistan, where we targeted and killed the ISIS official there, which was a big deal. Well, and then you're also seeing some more bombastic language, which I like from the military, saying to ISIS, if you come to Afghanistan, you will be destroyed. So I like seeing that diplomatic way of the Obama administration going away, because
yeah, definitely. Well, Ryan's coming in and out here. This is so unusual. Ryan usually has a great Skype connection. All right, so let Ryan know that we will let him stand by here. Hey, Ryan, you're coming in and out on us, so we're give us another minute here. All right, are we sending him video back, Tim, or is it just his audio? Or just audio. Okay, so let's keep moving. You're coming through clear now. We'll try to give this another shot. What I did see is that Trump today has approved a plan to arm Syrian Kurds. This has been all through the mainstream media that President Donald Trump has approved this plan to arm the Syrian Kurds, which is a militia and could be an important ally for the United States in the fight against ISIS. Would you consider this a positive first step? I mean, or is it a risk long term? Because I can remember from my studies that there were points at time where we were arming Al-Qaeda. So who are these Kurds?
I love this. Love it, especially because it annoys the government of Turkey. Now, the Kurds are actually allied with some Christians in Syria. They have Christians as part of their coalition, and Sunni Arabs. So the Kurds are uniting people that oppose ISIS and oppose Al Qaeda and oppose other Islamic extremists into one diverse coalition. So I love the fact that Trump is approving the arming of them. The pushback you get is that the Kurds in Syria do have ideological links to a Marxist group that we consider to be terrorists, but they're technically separate. And so there is some argument among those that say, well, should you really be arming those that have links to a Marxist terrorist group?
Yeah.
But when you're dealing in the Middle East and you're fighting against ISIS, and you don't know why a lot of these Kurds sign up for this specific group, it's probably just because they have money and weapons.
Yeah.
Then they're light years ahead of everyone else in that area.
Well, Ryan, what are we giving them? I mean, are they small munitions? I mean, are big artillery? I mean, like, what are we giving them?
But it is going to be heavier weapons, not surface-to-air missiles, not Stinger missiles, not tanks, but some heavier stuff. And that's good because they're preparing now to take on the capital of ISIS, Raqqa. So that's very, very important. And they're going to be doing so, again, arm in arm with Christians. There's going to be Christians attacking Raqqa as well. But you still have the Assad regime there. You have jihadists backed by Turkey that would like to be the ones that take on Raqqa and take other territories. So how this goes, we don't really know. But at least we're backing the Kurds, and they're the best of the bunch there right now.
Do you think that the Pentagon was asking the Obama administration to arm groups like this, or like the Kurds, and the Obama administration? Oh, yeah, absolutely. So in large part,
I mean, this is right from the beginning with the civil war in Syria. You had Syrian rebels, some of which were actually secular and democratic at the time, saying, if you don't support us, then Al-Qaeda is going to become the rebels and the opposition, and you're going to be stuck between Iran's puppet, Assad, and then Al-Qaeda, which is exactly what happened. And pretty much everybody around President Obama were all screaming at the top of their lungs, even Hillary Clinton saying, look at what's happening. We have to build friends on the ground. And the Kurds especially have been loud in saying, look, we're pro-Israel. We have no intentions against you, the United States. Yeah. Unlike some of these other questionable groups that you support because the
All right. Hey, Ryan, give us 1 minute here. We're going to double check our connection here because you're such a good guest that I don't want to miss a word. Tim, can you make sure that we are on, can you check the internet connection that we're using on the Skype machine? Make sure it's production. That should be very important. Yeah, that should make it better. Hey, Ryan, if we lose you, we're going to call you right back. We're having a little bit of connection to you. I don't think, some people in the chat are saying that this is Facebook shutting him down. I hope that's not the case. I think that this is probably a internet connection on our end here in the studio, but we will work to resolve this. So it's Trump 2016 with a capital T, exclamation. Now you guys know our production Wi-Fi password. So if you come by the studio, you can log into our internet connection. So we're gonna work on getting Ryan back. There is a lot to digest. So let's break down kind of what he just said while we wait on Ryan to rejoin us. We started out the show by jumping into a discussion on ISIS, and really my main takeaway from Ryan, who's a professor and an expert in counterterrorism, is that for the first time under the Trump administration, you have to keep in mind that Ryan is nonpartisan. He's not a Republican or Democrat, and he just has policy positions that he thinks are best for America. And his take is that for the first time, the Pentagon has been enabled by the President of the United States, President Donald Trump, to take appropriate action in defeating ISIS. And that's starting, at least in part, with what we were discussing when Ryan was just on, which is that, are we having trouble here? Let me show the password so I can see. Yes, join. All right, so we're having problems here with our Skype connection, but we are working. Try it without that, without the exclamation. All right, so we should have Ryan back here in just a minute. I'm sorry, guys, for the delay. We're having to change out our internet connection here because we're having some issues with Ryan's Skype. He will be back in about 15 seconds, I believe, and we're going to move on to a discussion on North Korea and the potential nuclear threat that they pose to us. Hey, Ryan, you're back, I see.
Hey, I'm here for now, at least.
Yes, yeah. You know what? I don't think this was on your end. I think this is on our end, so I apologize for that.
Damn right it was on your end. It was not going to be on my end.
yeah. So I mean, you were saying that for the first time, the Pentagon is feeling empowered by the President of the United States and not necessarily at odds like they were under the Obama administration.
Yeah, there are different factions within the Trump administration that has me a bit concerned because there are those disagreements. But you can tell just by the special operations raids that are going on and the messaging that there are changes at this point. Are they decisive changes where you can say, all right, where we've captured a piece of territory from the terrorists that we otherwise wouldn't have? You can't say that at this point, but it's so early on. But the news about arming the Syrian Kurds, I think, is very, very positive. And that shows that Trump is willing to slap Erdogan in Turkey across the face.
Well, let's talk about Erdogan real quick, because he had earlier on the Walk and Talk, we were talking about a comment that he made about flooding Jerusalem with Muslims. I mean, this is a guy, at least it seems to me, this dictator in the making, right? I mean, he's clearly undemocratic. He's out of control. And that sort of rhetoric, particularly directed at Israel, really set me back. What's your assessment of Erdogan?
He scares the living daylights out of me.
Really?
And that's because he's so good at what he does. Groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, to which he belongs, they incrementally gain power, and they try to do so with some level of public opinion. They messed it all up in Egypt. We saw what happened there. They got thrown out. But Erdogan has actually been able to win elections and then increase his power and been doing this since 2002 until now. People are waking up and saying, oh, we have a theocratic dictator that sponsors Islamic jihad in power. But those of us that have been watching this have been seeing this happening incrementally over time. Well,
and what's scary is that Erdogan, I mean, he was pushing to join the European Union. You know, I mean, to think that they were so close to accepting this tyrannical dictator into the Union. I mean, it says all you need to know about the state of the European Union. But let's move on. I'm really concerned, Ryan, about what's happening in North Korea. You know, we're seeing an escalation that hasn't really tempered. You're continuing to see live fire exercises conducted by the Chinese, conducted by the Russians, and conducted by the United States and South Korea together. What's next? Because it seems as though, I mean, based on the assessments that I've read, that the North Koreans may test a sixth nuclear weapon at any moment. If that were to happen, what will be the response from the international community?
It might be more sanctions, and you might actually get a tougher response from China now, because if you look at the North Korean state media and what the leaders are saying, and this is the first time I've seen it with this intensity, they are criticizing China. I mean, that didn't happen under any other administration. And so we are seeing a break there. And there's some speculation that the rivals that Kim Jong-un killed, he wasn't targeting them just because they were rivals. I mean, he would kill them anyway. But it was partially because he feared that China could see these rivals as an alternative to him. And so there's an indication here that we might be able to work with China a little bit, and it would help if we pressured them, sanctioned entities in China that are sustaining the North Korean regime. But the election in South Korea also undermines a lot of our strategy now, because you have a new leader in South Korea that is critical of the U.S., seems to blame North Korea, but blame us also for the tension, and wants to engage and basically give them money with a new, more open policy. And I'm thinking of those 28,000 troops that are in South Korea right now and wondering, does it make sense for them to be there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you mentioned this election, because I was looking at some polling, and the third most important issue to South Koreans, according to this poll, was national security. If I were a country on the brink of nuclear war, potentially, I think it would be pretty high on my list. And so what's happening domestically? I mean, for them to elect somebody that's anti-American, we've been subsidizing their defense for a long time, and we're putting the safety and security of our homeland at risk to defend them as an ally. So why should we continue to hold up our end of the bargain if they're going to trash us publicly and fail to share in the responsibility of funding their defense?
Yeah, and they got so offended over a $1 billion price tag on having a missile defense system there to protect them. Yeah. That's not part of our missile defense system. That's not one of those things that protect us from ICBMs necessarily. No. That's more for them. And so that ticked me off a bit. South Korea's, when you look at the polling, there's an approval rating of the United States that is something that's valuable. But at the same time, you do have protests against the American military presence there. I would love to see a referendum there by the South Koreans that basically on the question of, do you want the American military presence there? Because I've got news for you. If you talk to people involved in contingency planning for war with North Korea, those 28,000 troops that are in South Korea to protect them are in grave danger. That's not enough to stop a North Korean invasion. Those are high casualties, and in some ways, you could argue that it's beneficial to the North Koreans because they can always say, hey, our artillery can massacre your troops. And I don't like them being stuck in the middle of that, especially with the attitude we're getting from the South Koreans.
Well, Ryan, I mean, it's interesting to me, North Korea, because at this point, they don't seem to pose much of a threat to the United States homeland because, as far as I know, they don't have the capability to deliver a nuclear warhead to the continental United States. With that said, they're clearly developing that capability, and some assessments have scared me because it seems like it's not that far off that they theoretically could be able to deliver a nuclear payload here. How do we get out in front of this now? Because this seems to me, when you have a literal crazy person at the helm of this country with their finger on the nuclear button, theoretically, this is an existential threat to the United States of America. In real terms, with the capabilities that we currently have on the table, how do we eliminate the possibility for the breakout of war? And I'm not talking about in the short term, I'm talking about in the long term. How do we remove this vicious dictator who has massacred his own people and has threatened to massacre millions of Americans here in the homeland? How do we remove him so that this threat doesn't exist?
Well, first of all, the threat to the homeland doesn't just come in delivering a nuclear payload to the United States. You just need medium-range ballistic missiles, which they have for an EMP attack, or a more specialized EMP attack using the satellites.
Exactly. Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and you're talking about not just a city being blown up. You're talking about the destruction of the entire United States if they do it the smart way.
Yeah.
So the risks are very high. But those risks also get higher if we end up in a war with them for fighting on behalf of the South Koreans and everything else. But the long-term solution, it's a dirty word nowadays, but regime change is what you have to look at. And that's going to come in a few different ways. Either it's stimulating a coup, which is why he's been killing his rivals because he doesn't want the military to come in and kick him out, or it's China just straight up invading the place in order to prevent refugees from flowing in, or it's a popular uprising, or it's a combination of all of that. But one day this regime is going to crack, and it's going to fall, and it's going to be very bloody, and it's going to be extremely scary, and it's going to happen. What the U.S. needs to be doing is having better contingency planning with China. I hear whispers that apparently it's inadequate for that eventuality.
What does that mean? What are those contingency plans?
Well, for the event of a civil war, an uprising, or the collapse of the North Korean regime, meaning how does the U.S. do this with China in a way that we don't go to war with each other? Does that mean China occupying the place? How do you handle that? Does the U.S. go into North Korea with the South? That type of thing.
Yeah.
And make sure all these weapons in WMD don't get loose because they're going to be available for the highest bidder.
Yeah.
But the other options we have is start mobilizing a government in exile of some kind. You've got to have some type of leadership outside there that can go in. Yeah. You've got to sanction the entities in China that sustain the regime, punish those Chinese companies, pressure the Chinese, and then use Reaganite tactics like setting up cell phone towers, smuggling in propaganda material, stuff that can break the information blockade that the North Korean regime requires to brainwash its population.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you mentioned the EMP threat to the United States. This is something I did a report on here at DML a couple weeks ago, and it's something I've been studying for a long time, for years. And the threat is real, and there's zero sense of urgency, at least until as of late, to resolve this issue and to harden our infrastructure against this threat. At least since the Cold War, there's been zero urgency. How difficult would it be to be proactive at this point? How expensive do you think it would be to harden our national infrastructure against this threat?
I forget the numbers, but I remember numbers something like $15 billion, $30 billion, like whatever
it was,
as far as the national budget goes, it was nothing.
It's nothing.
Especially when you consider you're talking about the potential destruction of the United States and the death of the majority of the population. There have been some preparations done, not so much for EMP, but it's applicable to EMP for solar flares and environmental things. So, look, if to bring left-wingers on, we have to cite the potential of an environmental catastrophe coming from outer space, and let's use that argument. Whatever it is, this has got to be priority number one above everything else.
Well, so I'm trying to understand. I mean, this is less about foreign policy and more about domestic policy. This is something that for a long time, even people like me, I mean, I was afraid to publicly talk about this because I didn't want to be considered a kook, right? But you do have some people, like Newt Gingrich, he's been talking about this for years, and he had co-wrote that fiction book about the potential fallout from one of these kinds of attacks. But why is it unacceptable to even discuss this if you're in Washington? Because I do think there's a taboo attached with this kind of theory.
Well, how do you even open up the conversation? I mean, if you hang out in D.C. circles, you'll see why it's difficult to mention that. Because number one, it's not the topic of conversation, and then number two, you sound nuts when you bring it up. And the best argument you can use is mention that the Iranians, the North Koreans, the Russians have all simulated and talked about doing this for a long time. To them, this is absolutely real. And then the government put together the EMP Threat Commission in 2008. It came out with its report saying this is all real. Look, it wasn't that long ago. I was in your position where I would not mention this because it sounded so nutty that I thought somehow you've got to be able to punch a hole in it. Somehow this is going to be debunked. But then the Congressional Commission was put together on this, and they came out with their just electrifying report.
No pun intended.
That's by top nuclear scientists. And now I talk about it all the time.
Well, for those that don't know, because I see a lot of the comments here, can you explain what an EMP is and how, for instance, the North Koreans could use one of these surveillance satellites that they have orbiting the planet to deliver a devastating attack on the United States?
Right, so there's two ways you can do this. The first is you just put a nuclear weapon on a ballistic missile that's medium range, something like the North Koreans or the Iranians have. And you put it onto an oil tanker, you put it onto some type of vessel, preferably not with your country's flag, so you can disguise who's doing it, and you get just enough near the coast of the United States, or both coasts if you want to be extra sure this is gonna work, and you launch it into the sky, and you detonate it at a particular altitude. There's minimal time to react, and you, depending on where you detonate it, you could theoretically, with one nuclear weapon, disable and destroy all the electronics in the continental United States, and we go dark right overnight.
Let's put that into context. That means the electrical grid of the United States would be blown out like that. Every vehicle on the road, made since the 70s, would be out. All of the trucks delivering gas and food to your supermarket and your gas station, all of that in an instant. All the pipelines, all of the emergency vehicles, all of the airplanes, all the helicopters, out.
Facebook, gone.
Yeah, you won't be able to get this great news. You won't be able to get this great news. So this is a real legitimate threat. And forget a Tin Pot dictatorship like North Korea or Iran. I mean, it's theoretically even possible you could have some tyrannical group like ISIS deploy a weapon like this, looking not so far down the road. I mean, you don't need to necessarily use a nuclear weapon to generate an EMP. So this threat's real, it's undercovered, and based on what you're telling me, Ryan, it wouldn't even cost that much to resolve. It wouldn't cost that much. I mean, even if there's a tenth of a percent chance that something like this could happen, the cost seems so minimal to harden ourselves against this threat. I don't know why we're not doing it. With that, though, Ryan, we're to the end of the show. This is a quick 30-minute show. We've learned a lot. I mean, we've covered a lot, everything from Turkey to ISIS and Syria and North Korea and EMPs. So I thank you for joining us, and hope to have you back soon.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for having me.
And Ryan, where can people follow you if they want to know more?
Sure. The best place to go to is clarionproject.org and the Clarion Project Facebook page.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Ryan.
All right, thank you.
Take care. So with that, this is the third of our beta tests for Harlan on the Hill, and we're learning a lot with each of these. We've experimented with different styles, different segments, and we're going to continue to do that. And so I appreciate your feedback in the comment section. I'm taking a look at everything. We're trying to create shows that feel distinct from one another. So I didn't want to make this feel like the walk and talk, and I didn't want to make this feel like the truth. I wanted to try to give this something different. So every show we've been trying a little bit of a different segment. This was something that I was talking to Dennis, and we wanted to find an expert that would bring in a different perspective, something that you're not hearing anywhere else on the internet or TV. And Ryan, he always gives you, a totally honest, straightforward assessment. Like I said, he's nonpartisan, right? And so we really, really appreciate it. If you love what we're doing, make sure that you download the app. It's a DML app. Just search for Dennis Michael Lynch in the Google Play Store and the iOS App Store. We love all the feedback that you continue to give us, so please put that in the comments section or on the comments in the chat on the website. You can also go to Submit News on DennisMichaelLynch.com and let us know what you think about this show. Let us know what you think about the Walk and Talk. And if you want to see more shows like this, and if you want to see us bring in some more personalities, Ryan's great. I mean, he would be a great host for a show. If you want to see more people like this, giving you great original content every day, and not just talking heads. Ryan and I weren't yelling. We weren't spouting off talking points. You didn't hear any talking points today. That's one of the biggest differences between this show and something that you would see on traditional cable news. We're trying to make it educational, but not necessarily so boring. So thank you guys so much. And like I said, we'll see you on the next show.